Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, September 22nd. Happy fall. State Senator Barry Feingold is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. He's a driving force on economic development at the State House, but right now, some key legislation has stalled out. Can things get back on the road? It's time to go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR, everyone. I'm Ed Harding.
And I'm Charmin Sacchetti. With us at the table, State Senator Barry Feingold. He represents the 2nd Essex and Middlesex District. Before that, he served in the House. He was a candidate for state treasurer in 2014, a resident of Andover. He holds degrees from Franklin and Marshall College, the Massachusetts School of Law, and Harvard University. Thanks for being here.
Charmin and Ed, thanks for having me.
It's great to see you as always. Yeah. So let's start with Stewart Healthcare, because two former Stewart hospitals are in your district, right? The Holy Family Methuen and in Haverhill, those two. Lawrence General is taking those over, and now a U.S. Senate committee has voted to hold the CEO, Ralph De La Torre, in contempt for failing to appear before them. So he now faces potential prison time. That is down the road. But talks on a healthcare oversight bill collapsed on Beacon Hill. So how could the House and the Senate not reach a deal on such a major issue?
Well, I think there's still time to get it done. And as someone who's lived through this with our hospitals, I think the work that's ahead of us is frankly harder than the work that's been behind us. And a lot of these hospitals were left in very bad condition, and we're going to have to help get these hospitals to where they need to be. So a lot of work is still ahead of us, and I think we're all willing to roll up our sleeves and get it done.
And the ones that have gotten headline attention, the Kearney and the Shelby Valley Medical Center, were forced to close. Are you confident that the hospitals that were sold will survive?
I think if we work together as a team, I praise Lawrence General for stepping up. I think if we work together as a region, I think we can keep these hospitals open, but it's going to have to be a collaborative effort. I praise the governor for the work she's done in her team, but as I said, we have a lot of work still to do, and it's not going to be easy.
When you say a lot of work, do you mean like a lot of state funds are going to have to go to
I think it's state funding. I think it's making sure we don't have duplicative services in each of these hospitals, making sure that we're running these hospitals as efficient as possible. So there's a lot of work we still need to do to get these hospitals to where they need to be.
When you say they're in bad shape, what do you mean?
Stewart left them in pretty deplorable conditions, not having the adequate supplies, not keeping up with regular maintenance. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
It almost begs the question of oversight, doesn't it? I mean, if it's so far down the road and so far out of the barn, why didn't we stop it before it got out of the barn?
I think the big difference now is that we're going to have people that are on these boards that are local, that are going to be controlled by people that are in our communities, that are going to make decisions that are based on what's good for the patients, not what's best good for profits.
But you think a solution is coming potentially within a matter of weeks?
Yeah, I do believe, I do think that we're going to continue to work on a health care bill that I think could, avoid some of these problems that we've seen.
All right, let's talk about economic development. That's in your wheelhouse because you're on the Joint Committee on Economic Development. Now, before the end of the session, lawmakers were unable to reach a deal on that. It's one of the governor's also biggest priorities, providing billions to the state's life sciences, climate tech industries, among other things. Is anything getting done on this in informal sessions?
Yeah, we are having great negotiations. I'm negotiating with Aaron Mikowitz, who's a great person and really cares and wants to get the House Ways and Means Chair, and working with all the other people involved. And I do think we're going to get something done. And this is a very complicated bill.
Before the end of the year?
I actually think in the next few weeks, I think we'll get something done. And understand that we are spending billions of dollars. And with the revenues that we've seen the last couple of months, it's been dicey. So we want to get this right, and we want a bill that's not only going to be good for the next year, but for good for the next 5 to 10 years. Because the one thing we do need to be is fiscally responsible, prudent, and making sure that we're thinking long-term and strategic.
What is this bill going to do for people?
Well, I think one of the things it's going to do is we have probably the best biotech community in the nation. We have 18 of the top 20 biopharma companies here in Massachusetts. As Secretary Howe keeps saying, we need to grow our lead of these companies, that we need to make sure that not only do we keep them here, but we attract even more companies. So we want to make sure that the resources are here for these companies. We also want to focus on areas like clean tech and food sciences and really grow our lead in these areas.
So Barry, this brings us here. Census data shows that the state is losing population, and the high cost of living is right at the top of one of the reasons why, especially housing, seems to be a top reason that people are fleeing the state. So that's a hurdle.
Yep.
That's a big hurdle. So what are lawmakers doing doing about it?
Well, we passed a robust housing bill, which is going to have more funding for affordable housing. But one of the big things that we did on that is accessory dwelling units. So if you have a garage and you want to convert it into another unit, let's say you want to rent it out, let's say you want to put your parents there, you put someone who recently graduated college there, that is something that we're going to make it a lot easier for people in the Commonwealth to do. But ultimately what we need is more production. When you look at a state like Arizona that actually has growing population, their rents are going down for only one reason. They've had a lot of production. And what we need to do in the state is we need to make it easier to build. And that's some of the things we did accomplish.
How can you get over the production hurdle, though? I mean, that's a massive hurdle because there are many veins that run off of that.
In this last bill, we have made it a little easier. For example, when there's a town meeting, in the past you have to get 2/3 to get something passed. Now it's majority. And the other thing is that we need interest rates to come down. There are 30,000 permits ready to go in the city of Boston that aren't getting built because construction costs and interest rates are so high. I think with interest rates coming down, we're going to see a lot more production here in the Commonwealth.
And we always hear, in the Communities Act, for example, not in my backyard. It's a good idea, but not in my backyard.
And those are things that we have to continue to push because ultimately that helps with production too, and we ultimately need more production.
Is the millionaire's tax doing anything to force people out, restrict people from coming in, make people rethink about living in Massachusetts?
Well, I think what we have to do with the millionaire's tax is we have to make sure people understand that we are spending that money prudently, that we're making great investments in education, that we're helping the T to improve its services.
But is it pushing people out?
Well, ultimately, that is something that for some people, yes. But I think what we also need to do is show people that that we're investing the money in a very smart and prudent way. And the other thing I would say about that is one thing that we have to do a better job here in the state is we can't demonize people that are in the higher socioeconomic status. What we need to do here in Massachusetts, regardless if you're rich, poor, or middle class, we want everybody, and everybody matters in the Commonwealth, and we just shouldn't villainize any one of those groups. And I think we're all in this together and make sure everybody is welcomed here.
I want to talk about the migrant crisis impacting Massachusetts. Some families now are sleeping again at Logan Airport, even though they've been restricted from doing so. So the governor, she has put a 5-day limit on staying in overflow shelters. And if you spend even 1 day in an overflow shelter, you can't access longer-term shelter for 6 months. Where are you on these policies? Do you agree with this?
I agree with what the governor's doing. We cannot be the safety net for the whole country. These are very, very difficult decisions, and I really praise what the governor has done. These are not easy decisions. These are difficult things to do. But ultimately, what we really need is we need the federal government to pass an immigration reform bill that will make sure that people that need resources are getting the resources, and we have
more than $1 billion a year. This is costing Massachusetts,
and that's why we had to put limits on how long people can stay in these shelters.
And so now they're sleeping at Logan again. So what do you do?
Well, I think ultimately what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to reach out to people in the religious community, people in the nonprofit community, and everybody's going to help. Like, we are one Massachusetts. Everybody's got to step up, but it just can't fall on the government to try to do everything.
Well, the likelihood of the federal government jumping in is in your opinion?
It's going to be very difficult, but it doesn't mean we can't give up and keep asking for it.
The next item I want to talk about is State Auditor Diana DeZoglio. She wants to audit the legislature. She also pushed for a ballot question that voters will weigh in on in the November election. So where do you stand on the audit issue?
Well, on all the ballot questions, I'm against them. I'm concerned about all these questions.
You're against all
of them? Yeah. Okay. I think I'm very concerned. These are the most ballot questions that we've had in 20 years, and I don't think it's the best way to legislate. I think when we talk about psychedelics, there's a great debate that we should have out there. I'm just not sure people have really spent the time on this. I know I haven't.
Why are you against the MCAS question?
Well, I think this has been a good thing for having graduation requirements. Only about 600 kids were denied graduation because of the MCAS, and I think part of the reason why our test scores have gone up and that we have one of the most highly educated workforces here in the Commonwealth is because of MCAS. And I don't think we should go
no on all. I'm going to ask you about them all. Sure. What about tipped workers? What about that?
When I talk to people that work at restaurants, they do not want this bill. When I talk to waiters and waitresses, they do not want this to pass. So I'm listening to the people that are most directly affected by this, and they do not want this to pass.
How about magic mushrooms? Should they be legalized?
I just, like many people, I haven't spent enough time on this. There might be a good use for this in society, but this is something that should not be on the ballot, that should be going through a committee, that should be fully vetted. And I think if you talk to the average person, they couldn't tell you the pros and cons about legalizing something like this.
And no on the ride share as well.
Yeah, and once again, that's another example. When I ride Ubers, I ask these people, what did they think about the ballot question? And they tell me they're against it.
Barry Feingold's in the chair. We're on the record. Stay with us.